Mommytrack Daddy Whispers Podcast is now called Birth Agni Podcast.
Welcome to Mommytrack Daddy Whispers Podcast Season 2.
We've all been whacked. All of us. I don't care what the world says. Maybe that's probably one of the best ways of parenting Indian kids. I'm not sure.
What were you like 2 days back?
I think मेरा ही बेटा है. It's like that situation.
अगर आपने मुझे ये कहते हुए सुना है that fathers do not open up, तो बिल्कुल ठीक सुना है, at least in my experience. And I believe it is very significant to listen to the father's side of the story too. Don't you think so? Mothers always wanting husbands to talk a little more. Fathers complaining that women do not understand. इसीलिए इस month की theme है Conversation with Fathers, and today we have with us two guests. Peter, who is a marketing professional and digital marketer. Nadir, who has been a part of the Indian television and media industry, currently heading a digital agent. Nadir and Peter, let's call you Nadir Pop and Peter Pop. Welcome to Mommytrack Daddy Whispers Podcast, our little nest.
Hi Divya. Thank you so much for getting on the podcast. It's very exciting when you have to play the guest and not the host. So always look forward to join in as a guest.
Lovely.
Yeah, thanks for turning the table on us, and thanks for calling us Nadir Pop and Peter Pop. I think that's become our identities now, at least.
The only people who actually say that is Peter and me. That's it. Nobody else says it. So it's nice to hear a third person actually address us that. So yeah.
Yeah. So for our listeners, ये suffix इन्होंने ही लगाया है. They're on a podcast called Pops in a Pod, where they call themselves Nadir Pop and Peter Pop. And I was curious, guys, where does this suffix come from?
So we wanted to obviously have an interesting name for the podcast, and when Peter called me with the idea that we should definitely do something in the parenting space, I don't know, for some reason immediately just is struck in my head that we should do a play of words with pop and pod, and then I just said, hey, how about we just call ourselves Pops in a Pod? And Peter's like, yeah, sounds good, let's do it. So I think that's how it kind of stuck.
But Dilwale Dulhaniya Le Jayenge kitni baar dekhi thi?
So I see where the reference you're getting it from, but no, it has nothing to do with Anupam Kher.
Okay.
No, so actually it's strange, right? Nadir, just for some background, used to do a blog called The New Age Dad, and we became work colleagues, and then I became a follower of the blog. And when I came to him with the idea for what's now Pops in a Pod, I just titled it New Age Dad, and I think we still have our Google Drive called that. And I think for the longest time, we knew exactly what we wanted to talk about, what we didn't want to talk about. But naam hamesha aakhri aa jata hai, right? So finally the Nadir came to it. But talking about, DDLJ, right? Very coincidental thing is I call my dad Pop. And actually that's what his name is saved on my phone. So much so that if I call him Dad, my dad knows ki kuch dal mein kala hai. That's why I'm calling him Dad, not Pop. But yeah.
And it catches on. The name really catches on. So I think it's really nice to call you Nadir Pop and Peter Pop. Okay. And we were discussing earlier that fathers don't open up. And I just said that fathers don't open up. So guys, what do you think about it? You have a podcast that talks about parenting and everything else from a father's perspective. What is your take on this?
See, I'll be honest with you. And this is purely my experience. A lot of my parenting style and everything comes directly from my dad. So much so, the day I found out that I was going to be a dad, the first person I told was my own father. And the question I asked him was, were you scared when you found out that, mom was pregnant with me? And he said, scared about what? Like, that's my dad. So, of course, I mean, he was one of those 80s dads, right? Even though his demeanor may look like one of those 80s dads, the mustache and all, I used to always see him compared to my friends' dads, and they would be intimidated, and I'd be like, I also scared. He's just my dad. He's the cool guy. He plays cricket with me. he breaks the window and then kind of blames it on me. All that kind of stuff we did growing up. So yeah, that's a distinction I noticed between like my dad and other dads. So my constant endeavor is that, I'm as good a dad as him, if not more.
Okay, that's wonderful. And अगर मैं अपने father की बात करूँ तो he is very expressive. And he wouldn't tell you about how he's feeling in the daily life and everything. But there are certain things that hit him. So he'd like come to me and say, "Beta, ye aise hai, wo aise hai." He would cry at certain things. So I've seen my father cry. Every father is different. And just the way you said, Peter, that others found him intimidating, but you were like, yeah, he's my dad. I play with him and everything. So yeah, I think that's the stoic presence of a father that we've had in our culture throughout. Nadir, what is your take on this?
So, I mean, both of y'all have very expressive fathers, and pretty involved with on a day-to-day aspect. My father is exactly how you described a societal dad, right? Stoic, not very expressive, will have a very strange way of showing love. And I grew up in that kind of a household where my father is still the head of the family. I live in his house. This is his house, right? We are born and brought up in the city of Mumbai. I don't pay rent, thank God. Or rather, thank dad. So that way, I think both Peter and I were very privileged that way. But yeah, from an emotional standpoint, what my father provided as a breadwinner, right? And I heard most of his life stories, strangely, when there were guests around. So we would never talk directly, but I would only hear about his life when there were guests around, because he used to really love telling stories, anecdotes, or whatever it was, right? So that's when I would sit and really listen to him, because I was like, he's never going to tell me this ever. So,
Yeah.
I better kind of open my ears and, listen to what he's saying. So that's how we grew up, my sister and I. And though my mom keeps claiming that my sister is exactly like my dad, so if you ask her a question like, so, how's this meal? And I'll be like, oh, it's very nice. Yeah, a little bit salty, but I love the flavors or whatever. That's me. My sister's like, nice. And that's it. So my mom keeps telling that, yeah, she's gone on the father. So yeah.
So talking about the new generation fathers, you and Peter, if you were to define yourself as a father from what we just discussed, how would you define yourself?
So I'm very open. If there's one thing that I had to kind of put myself in compared to my father, I think I was very clear in my head that I think communication is going to be key. It's very important to communicate with your child, and it's so important to communicate on a regular basis. So I'm extremely expressive, and I think that's what makes me whatever new age dad, right? It's this one chance. I'm just going to stick to one kid. That's it, right? And I'm going to give it everything. I'm going to give it all. This is who I am, and this is what I intend to do. So that's why when we started this platform, Pops in a Pod, it's not to tell that, oh, this is Nadir and this is Peter and this is who we are. It's more to actually tell people the experiences of fatherhood, because that's not been spoken about a lot. And we just want to go out and say that, hey, we are perhaps those 5%, dads, and there are many dads just like us out there, but unfortunately in the 5% gamut, who are very involved. My friends who are dads, very involved, very expressive fathers, constantly communicating, sitting, making sure, schooling is done, food is done, whatever. So we are very involved dads. And I think that's the word I would like to say, involved. We are very involved dads.
Yeah, participation is what's the new age fathers, forte maybe. If I were to ask you, is it any different? I mean, in terms of you being an easy or a strict father. So today, are you an easier father as compared to your own father? Or maybe you maintain the strict demeanor from time to time?
Honestly, like, it also depends on the situation. And, this is a discussion my wife and I had before we had our son. And we were very open that, we didn't want to fit these stereotypes. Typically, what happens is that one parent is always seen as stricter than the other. And, by default, then the other parent is the easier one. And we experienced that in our own lives. So we were very clear that, both have to be a balance. so far it's been 4 years, and I think we're still getting there. There's certain times where my son will act up and I need to put my foot down. And it all depends on the situation. I mean, sometimes we feel that, when it comes to certain things like food, my son will, go towards my wife. But, when he wants to play, and he knows exactly, and it's strange how, kids at this age figure out this, right? But it was a very conscious decision on my wife and my part that we don't want one parent to be demonized, if I may put it that way. Because as the child grows up, then that kind of sticks in their head, right? And you don't want to be even though you're the fun parent, you don't want to be the strict parent just because of a certain situation or a set of situations.
Yeah, that kind of a demand or that kind of a pressure has been uplifted from us, probably because of globalization or books out there, because we tend to read a lot more, we tend to see the world, how things happen elsewhere. And in my case, I often see that children everywhere across the world are same. So if somebody in the US is not wearing socks being a toddler, that's exactly what's happening to me with my daughter. She doesn't wear a socks. So I mean, it's not how she is, it's just a development stage. So yeah, figuring it out and not having that persona attached to yourself, which actually stresses the parents out a lot more than children. They do get stressed out in those situations, but the parents, they get stressed out equally. And so yeah, parenting is a process. That's what we talk about in Mommytrack Daddy Whispers podcast, and I'm so glad you brought it up here. And
if I just may add one more thing. What happens also, right? And I'm sure Nadir can chime in and agree or disagree on this. Is it so strange? You see your parent who, I'm not saying, the dad or the mom, but growing up who was very strict. And now the moment they're the grandparent, completely changing, right? And you're just like, hey, I never got away with all of this. And now you're letting my child get was my entire childhood something, did something go wrong, or was I, don't you agree, Nadir?
No, absolutely. I think you're bang on. So if I had to tell you, we've all been whacked. All of us. I don't care what the world says. Maybe that's probably one of the best ways of parenting Indian kids. I'm not sure. Do I subscribe to it? No, because now we know, as you said, right? Globalization. बहुत सारी इन्फॉर्मेशन है यहाँ पे. गूगल पे आप कुछ भी डाल दो, मेंटल हेल्थ, अगर बच्चे को मार धाड़ करेंगे तो ऐसा होगा वैसा होगा. तो वी आर वेरी माइंडफुल ऑफ दोस थिंग, बिकॉज वो नॉलेज है हमारे पास कि यार ये नहीं कर सकते आज. लेकिन but yeah, there are certain ways of dealing with it. So I agree with Peter. Parents were a different set for us, like different human beings, and they just evolved into some other being when our kids came around. My dad still gets annoyed and pissed off, so that hasn't changed much. So he'll be very nice and very sweet towards my daughter and whatever. He'll play with her, but the minute it comes to the TV or if he's eating and all, and there you just hear him screaming, "Get her out of the room! I've had enough." And I'm like, yeah, we've also had enough. You keep her now.
इसको कोई ले जाओ. Everybody is like fighting. इसको कोई ले जाओ.
वो पिंग पोंग चलते रहता है यहाँ पे हमारे घर पे. It's normal.
Yeah, and my mom said to me when I had the Visha that interest is more lovable than principle. So we were principle, and our children are interest. And I definitely agree with the fact that you cannot give advice or tips because parenting has no tips. It's very important to equip yourself in knowledge on human behavior and child psychology if you have the means. So I definitely agree with you on that.
But Divya, even if parents give tips to other parents, sometimes it's okay, right? If somebody comes I'll go to Peter and tell him, how do you deal with a situation like this? My daughter's doing blah, blah, blah. And Peter will say, Arey, something similar happened with my son also. So this is how I deal. They're like, okay, great, fantastic. You know what's worse? What's worse is when a non-parent comes to you and says, नहीं करना चाहिए ये गलत है. अरे भाई तू कौन है? कहाँ से आया है? तेरे बच्चे है कि नहीं? That's annoying. I'm sure it comes from a place of concern and love or whatever, right? But you don't have kids. right? I'm sorry, you don't have kids. You cannot possibly give me advice on how to deal with a situation that I'm very well aware of how to deal with it, right?
Yeah.
Kids are very finicky. Let's face
Yeah,
it. They have an attention span of a goldfish. So every time they make the same mistake, the outcome is very different.
Yes.
Right. So, I mean, I'm sorry, but I'm glad you're telling me something, but don't mind me. I'm not going to take your advice.
Yeah, so there's a difference between criticism and a well-meant advice. And it's just the way it's delivered. I think that's what tells you where it's coming from. That are
दिव्या,
doing that stuff.
हम भारत में रहते हैं, ठीक है?
हाँ.
जो डिलीवरी की आप बात जो कर रहे हो ना, वो हर भारतीय, वो हमेशा उसकी डिलीवरी, आपको भी पता है, हमें भी पता है कि वो डिलीवरी कैसे निकलती है उसकी, ठीक है? वो कंसर्न वाली कभी भी नहीं निकलेगी. It'll always be कैसा बच्चा है आपका? It's always like that, right? It's always as if I will now teach you how it's done.
Yeah.
But who are you? Why should I listen to you?
Yeah.
Right. So the whole aspect of personal space doesn't exist in this country. Tu mera bhai, main tera bhai, main jo bolunga, you have to listen to me. You know, it's very. I mean, it's nice. I get it. It's sweet. But back off. I'm already annoyed. I have a kid over here, so you know, give me some space. So yeah, it happens. It's all right. We get used to it now. We become very patient as parents.
Yes, and you know, no matter how much you push our boundaries, we'll be like, okay. So coming from what Nadir just said, you know, abhi mera bachcha abhi ye kar raha tha, so outcome was this, and tomorrow the outcome would be different. And you know, we often have, and I have those times when I have applied some measure and it turned out brilliantly, calmed my daughter like anything, and I was like, wonderful, I have the magic wand now. And the next time it happens, I'm like, Dan, it's not working. It's not working. What? Has this happened with you guys? I think it's very common. Let's just bring that discussion up on the table.
So, you know, it's strange that you talked about it. I think this is something that I think every parent can relate to is sleep, right? So from the early days only I said, you know what, I'm not going to be that stereotypical dad who's like, nahi, mera neend important hai, tum bacche ko dekho, yeah, and all. So I was like, you know what, I'm going to stay up, I'm going to put him to sleep and all. So
that's wonderful.
I had this thing where I was like, hey, you know what, I can sing to him. So I remember when he was a few months old, I would sing to him, walk with him. And I noticed a few times, like a few songs worked. And also I was like, yes, like I've cracked the code, exactly like you said, right? So I told my wife, very excited. So she's like, oh, good. Like this worked. Few days later, same thing happened. I sang the same song. I did everything. And that's the thing with parenting, right? I mean, 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2. 2 + 2 doesn't equal 4. There's so many multiple variables. And then as parents, sometimes you just keep scratching your head, like, maine kya kiya? So and then at some point, you're just doubting yourself. You're like, wait, did I do that right? Okay, should I do this again? So yeah, sleep, food, oh my God. Like my son keeps changing his mind about like his taste. Like,
definitely.
I'll tell people that, you know, usko mushroom bahut pasand hai. And then they'll make mushroom and give it to him and he'll say, yuck. And that is the thing that, like at that point, you're just like, oh my God, like I'm just worst parent ever. Like, maine kya kiya? Maine muh kyun khola? That kind of situation it is.
Yeah, because, you know, in the public, you proclaim something and it's then that they're going to change their mind. Okay, I don't like it. I never liked it. And they'll be so, you know, sure about it that you'll be like, okay, what were you like 2 days back?
Like, mera hi beta. It's like that situation.
It's almost like every kid has read Murphy's Law and come.
Yeah.
Hang on. This is what he's saying. I'm going to do the exact opposite now.
I like the way you've laid down, you know, relax, all relax. Okay. Going far from here, Peter and I were discussing about COVID, you know, the discussion that we all have these days. So we were discussing about the increasing digital space, the increasing use of pictures and videos of children. At times, maybe, you know, in the name of content creation at the expense of the child's privacy, maybe. And I was very glad that Peter and I had the similar bent of mind where we wanted to protect that privacy, because my reason was that I do not want to invade her privacy. Maybe tomorrow she, grows up and sees those pictures. If in case she sees, she'll be like, okay, I never wanted, or I don't want at this point of time that those pictures should have been up there. So That was my stance on it. But I would like to know from you guys, what's your take on it?
So I think from the beginning, it was very clear that we will not expose our daughters' very intimate pictures online, especially in the social media space. I mean, these are private moments. If we have to do it, we'll do it in such a way where it's not going to be saved. तो स्टोरीज पे डाल दिया, कहीं पे बाहर जा रहे हो, गाड़ी में हो आप, तो एक अच्छी फोटो बन रही है तो ठीक है, फोटो खींच के डाल दो उसको. My wife always has this thing, oh, my hair is looking great in the sunlight, the way it's like, oh, my daughter's also there, okay, chalo, let's. But we are very prudent that way. Did we do it in the past? Yes, we did. And there was a point where then I cleared all of those images because, I mean, I've become the father for the first time, and I want to show off my daughter. I want the world to know, what she's like. But I would also be very careful with the kind of images I would take. I wouldn't show her entire face and things like that. There were some photographs, obviously, that show her and her definition of her face. And one day I just went and I just cleared everything. I just removed everything from my Instagram page, and I realized that this is. I mean, I know nothing's going to happen, but why take a chance? So, and as you rightly said, tomorrow you might think that what you are putting up is sweet and funny and cute and whatnot. But when our kids grow up, they're just going to question like, can you not do that? It's you didn't put it up with my permission. And I remember there was this case in Austria. This girl turned 18 years old and she sued her parents, where she's like, they refused to remove these private pictures of me as a kid. I don't like it. I don't appreciate it. But imagine. Will this happen in India? I don't know. I don't want to take a chance. But the point is, there are certain things that are very private and it should remain private. And my wife keeps blaming me कि यार हर जगह तो कैमरा निकाल के खड़ा हो जाता है पिक्चर लेने के लिए. At least enjoy the moment, see what your kid's doing, right? Yeah. So I get that a lot, or I used to get that a lot. Now even I have forgotten about it. वो कैमरा पड़ा है कहीं ना कहीं, तो फोन पे अभी सब कुछ हो रहा है.
तो मौका भी कम मिलता होगा ना, because children, when they start running.
Yeah, and everything has to look good on Instagram, right? Like you'll start setting up after a point. By the end of it, it'll be like, it has to look natural. अरे ये क्या है मतलब? So, and we are all guilty of it. I'm not saying that उन लोग करते हैं, हम लोग कुछ नहीं करते. We are all guilty of it. We all do it. But do we want to do it with kids to that extent? At least we don't do it. We put up stories, yes, because we know it's going to disappear in 24 hours.
Yeah.
Do we put up posts? No. We kind of avoid that.
Yeah. So as somebody in the television and the digital space, but as somebody from that space, what do you think about the extent of forgery that can happen?
So the thing is, it's been a decade since I joined the digital industry. And the moment I realized how algorithms and Facebook and all of it works, right, I became very uncomfortable sharing, a lot of details online about myself. When my wife and I actually started dating, we barely had any photos. I think the first time we uploaded a photo of both of us online was when we got engaged. And that was the easiest way. The only reason I was okay with it was that was the easiest way to tell all my friends around the world that, hey, I'm engaged. Same thing happened with our wedding. We didn't put up, I actually saw the difference. The moment I went engaged on Facebook, all the ads I saw changed. I started seeing ring ads, honeymoon ads, all that kind of stuff. So it was very clear to me. It went to an extent that when my wife was pregnant, so I didn't put up much. We didn't tell a lot of people also. When she delivered, I was very clear to all my friends and family. Like I sent photos on WhatsApp and all. But 2 weeks, after my son was born, I literally had family say, we're really happy for you. We've shared it with a few select people, but you let us know when you're comfortable us putting photos online. Even now, I think that's one of the few pictures of my son on my Facebook is of him actually covering his face because the light was coming in.
Yeah.
And that's it. Like I'm very clear that way. Forgery and all, yeah, I mean, it is one of like the sad parts of the internet, honestly. I mean, that's the thing I feel also with, smartphones and the digital media, right now. There was a time that, if you had, remember those old school cameras, roll ke saath and all of that. Nobody would come and take a picture with your son or your daughter, right? But aaj kya hota hai? all it takes is like a second or two of someone to take a picture of your child, and that this is without you knowing or without anything else. There have been instances where I'm just like completely strange, like, why do you want to take a picture of my son? Like, you don't even know him, kind of thing. But yeah, you just have to kind of put your foot down at some point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've had a situation where people have walked up to me and they've said, "Can we take a picture of your daughter?" And I've said no. And these are
Yeah.
strangers and known people. So imagine I'm sitting in a public space and somebody just walks up to me and says, "Can I take a picture of your photograph? She's very cute." I said, "Absolutely not." And then I'll just hide her. And
Yeah.
I mean, it's weird. That's what I told you, right?
Yeah.
People think this is normal. कि
Yeah.
अरे बुरा मान गया, उसमें बुरा मानने की क्या बात है, फोटो ही मांग रहा था ना. Dude, privacy, like personal space, they don't get the concept of that, right? Like even when people who you know ask for that, I will think twice. And I'm like, so once I remember I got my daughter to office and there was this girl, very, very sweet girl, you know, and she loved kids. So when she saw my daughter, she was obviously playing, she was taking her everywhere, and I'm like following them around everywhere, seeing where she's going. Obviously she took a couple of photos. I was okay with it. And then suddenly next day I'm seeing that it's a part of her DP. And so my daughter is in her DP. And I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, that's weird. Why would you do that? So it's like almost like a trophy, you know, right?
Yeah.
Okay, अरे किसी और का बच्चा डाल दो उसको डीपी में, अच्छा लगेगा, लोग like करेंगे, whatever. I don't get it. So if you ask what is the main difference between, you know, parents now and parents then, I think it's the whole overprotectiveness that has, I think, definitely increased. And this is just one way of showing. I mean, I would be lying if I said that I'm not protective of my daughter. I am. I have to be. I mean, my one eye is always going to be on her. One, because she's small, she's young, and there's just too many people around, you know, and you just have to be very careful. She enjoys all the freedom, don't get me wrong,
Yeah.
but it's just that you have to be careful. You have to be careful.
Yeah, I definitely respect that and appreciate that at the same time, because I am also of the similar opinion. And I've had situations where family members took a picture and it was on their stories, on their Facebook. You took a picture, you did not keep it with yourself, never asked me why it was going to your friends of friends of friends, and maybe they can download
Correct.
it and then it goes somewhere else and the picture is
Yeah.
lying there on the internet everywhere. So
Yeah.
it's very important to bring forward this concept of privacy. And I think this is a medium, and whichever medium, if you talk to your friends, wherever you go, I mean, it's important to exercise it. And also when you brought up the point of our parents being not as protective as we are, I think the amount of exposure and the amount of tools and the amount of misuse that can happen now was
Yeah.
not there earlier. In this,
So the reason I'm smiling about this, right, is a lot of times my wife and I have this discussion where I say that, you know, if I knew all the things I knew now, right, I would lead my childhood very differently. Because and I'm sure Nadir can agree, we led our childhoods very carefree. Matlab, you would go to some dost ke ghar jaake aa gaya, and your parents would only have known him by name.
Yeah.
Today, I will never let my son do that, right? Or
Precisely.
somebody says, ki, ha, chal, my friend has this new video game or something like that. You would go because you didn't know better, right? And when I think back, I'm like, wow, like I did keep my parents up quite a bit, worry my parents quite a bit. So that's one of the things I always tell my dad, that hats off to you, because I don't know how you did all of that and managed me. But,
yeah, and this also, brings a memory for me. My Dadaji used to take me for a walk early in the morning, and he would leave me in a park or a mandir and go and take his rounds. He knew
Wow.
some old people there who would exercise and do all kinds of pranayams. I knew children there. I still have memories where I would just go to random people, talk to them, play in the mandir, go to mandir, do whatever I want for the next 45 minutes, and he'll come back and take me. I still cannot come to understand what was the difference in that time and today. Of course, today's times have changed.
You know, Divya, it's very sweet that you brought up grandparents. So I'll tell you a story about my grandmom. Okay, my grandmom was very, very conservative. Okay, and but she used to dote on me because I am a male child, right? And everything I do, she made sure that she had an eye on me, and chota hai, nazuk hai, ye hai, phalana, phalana, phalana. And I love that attention. Like I'm not going to lie. I love the attention, and it just got really strange when you go older, because then they still try and treat you like kids. So the first time I actually ventured out all by myself to go take a ride in the bus, go from घर का stop 4 stop और आगे जाओ और फिर वापस रिटर्न आ जाओ, राइट? वो कितना कुछ 15-20 मिनट का टाइम फ्रेम होगा, आधा घंटा पकड़ लो, चलो. I remember my granny was palpitating when she found out that I'm going to take a trip, in a local bus. उसने वो शगुन के पैसे लिए, चढ़ाए, कुछ दुआ हुआ पड़ी, मेरी दादी ने, and my mother just standing there and she's like, what is going on? This kid is going to become like, he's never going to grow up if this is how it's going to be. Imagine my mother saying that.
Yeah.
And she did that. So she made me touch. होता है ना कि ये 10 रुपए लो, हाथ लगा लो, गरीब इंसान को दे देंगे. All of that. It still happens today, by the way. My parents still do it when we go on a long trip. My father will give me 100 rupees. ये ले छू ले, दुआ हुआ पढ़ ले इस पे, गरीब को दे देंगे. And that culture has kind of, will I do that? I don't think so. But does that mean I'm not a protective parent? Of course not. I'm a very protective parent, but I'm not going to be go like crazy. What's going to happen? But my wife suspects that the first time my daughter goes out on her own, any public transport, whatever, I'll be the first one to follow her around everywhere.
Yeah.
Will it be true? I'm not sure. But yeah, I mean, you can never be too careful. That's the problem.
True. And I also like this perspective that you brought up, that we are protective and they were also protective in their own ways, and probably we are in our own ways, just because the ecosystem has changed through these years. And if I have to ask you, talking of traditions, like you said, what would be that tradition in your families which you would want to, transfer to your children or take down to your children?
So the thing is, I'm not a very traditional person.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I married my wife is neither is she. But I feel that, it's more important than telling your kids to do certain things, right? I mean, that's where my wife and I have been very conscious, is that whatever we do or whatever we tell our son, we do it ourselves. And it can be the smallest thing also. Leading by example, I think, is the most important thing for kids, because otherwise, if you just tell them, they immediately see that you're lying or you're just trying to tell them. And younger, you kind of inculcate that to him. But I must say, I mean, both my wife and I have, whenever it is that we can help someone out, in whatever small way it is, we do our little bit. And that's something I definitely want my son to continue doing, because I feel not many people do that anymore. I mean, we become so desensitized, everything around us. And we become very self-involved, I feel. You feel that, as parents, all of us are guilty where, certain time you're only focusing on your kids. But if you look around at the other kids who are not fortunate enough and all of that. So that's definitely something that my wife and I will constantly keep trying to push into our son. Because A is us accepting that, we have a particular privilege compared to everyone else, and we're further passed it on to him. So I don't want him to feel ki, like, ye mere dad ka hai, mummy ka hai, and sab theek hai, that kind of thing. I don't want him to kind of rest on.
Yeah.
Because it's very easy, right? I mean, we are living in, a metro city with a roof above our head and all the basic amenities. There are so many people a couple of kilometers away here in Bombay itself who don't lead those lives.
Yeah, talking about the lack of sensitivity these days and the importance of empathy, developing empathy in our children and compassion, maybe. There is also a lot of confusion when it comes to, there were times when our parents would just see a beggar and give them something, and we think twice, and we're always in dilemma. At least I am always in dilemma if I did that right or wrong. So I think, doing it just the way we want it to do and just leading by example is a great way. And, let them figure these things out on their own when they grow up, because it's not everything that needs to be taught to them. I definitely love that idea. And we've discussed a lot of, varied points here, and we've discussed about your podcast and a lot of other stuff. You did tell me that your podcast is kind of a journal of your experiences, like Nadir said. So, if you wanted them to listen to a particular episode or a particular story on your podcast, what would that be?
I would definitely go back to the first episode, because that was the first story that I wrote on the blog, and that was the first episode that we recorded, Peter and I. And any new project that you start, right, the first steps are the most important steps, and you will never forget that, right? And it just happens to be the birthing story. बहुत ही दिल से हमने रिकॉर्ड किया था, बड़ी शिद्दत से हमने बोला, मतलब वो रिकॉर्ड किया था हमने, तो वो कभी भूलूंगा नहीं मैं. And the entire process, right, of both our birthing stories, because they're so different, like wildly different stories. Like people will remember, okay, acha, this is this kid's birthing story, and this is Peter's experience, and that is something I would want my child to listen to for sure. Because when there are days when she's going to be extremely primal with her hatred towards her parents, right? It's gonna happen,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, it's gonna happen.
Yeah.
That's what I'm going to say. Yeah, TK, you hate me right now. It's okay. You don't want to say sorry. I don't want to say sorry. हम दोनों की ego है. ठीक है, no problem. ये काम कर, ये link ले, सुन ले इसको, उसके बाद तुझे जो करना है कर.
Yeah.
So I'm going to give her that episode. I said, सुन ले बस. You'll understand how much we love you, and you have no idea. We probably don't. We keep telling you this, and you don't want to hear it because you're embarrassed of your parents or for whatever reason.
Yeah.
But just hear it out, and then maybe once you're calm, then we can probably sit and have a drink together or whatever. But yeah. That's the episode that I would go back to.
That's very, very sweet. Peter, which episode would you want to, have your son listen to?
So before telling you that, right, I mean, you brought up an interesting point about us as parents. And I think, so I do another podcast also on heavy metal music. And
Okay.
I'm not joking. For me, that was easier to do. But the fact that Nadir and I spent an entire year working on Pops in a Pod, and every episode we craft, we always have like one of these guiding principles is, hey, when our kids grow up and they listen to this, what will they say? So I think when the episode that Nadir's talking about, I think we had like 3 or 4 drafts. We recorded, went back till we finally got it right. And I would definitely agree. I mean, like when I personally listen to that episode, I'm really proud of it. So I'm sure Zia, when she grows up, also will be. But for me, I always say that, our wives don't get enough credit. The entire episode is, or the entire podcast is Nadir Pop, Peter Pop. We keep talking about ourselves and all. The people who drive us and the reason why we can do this is our wives. And that's why in episode 4 and 5, 5 and 6, we got wives to talk about their journey. Because, for 2 guys, it's very easy to say, हाँ, मैं ऐसा करता हूँ, मैं वैसे करता हूँ, मैं बहुत अच्छा dad हूँ. But to get your wives to kind of, keep it real, talk about their journey also. Because like any relationship, right, it's 2 sides. You're only going to hear our story predominantly. And for me, honestly, my wife and I went through a lot from the time she got pregnant all the way to like she delivered, and we still go through every day. So, on days like Nadir said, like when my son will feel that, you don't like us, you don't want us. You think this life that you live is so easy and it was so easy for you to be born, or, everything that you have. Listen to these episodes, see what your parents went through over a matter of, it wasn't just like everyone looks at, the child being born, like, or being conceived and born is 9 months. No one realizes it's the years before that and the years after that that really is important, right? It's not just the 9 months, no?
Yeah. And I just had a thought that probably if we are in a stage when we are not as expressive due to tons of things, because, we have our own expressions, children have our own expressions. And like Nadir said, it's not necessary that we we easily converge to one point, because there are generations, there will be a gap. What will come tomorrow, we do not know. So that's wonderful and very, very sweet. And also, I wanted to point this out, since we are podcasters here talking. When a podcaster comes and tells you their story, very intimate maybe, just with its heart, I do see podcasting as a process wherein you want to help people out. You want to tell them that these are the experiences that I went through, and if you're going through them, then that's okay. Or maybe I just learned this, and let's talk about it, and maybe it will help you somewhere down the line. But it has its own emotional value, and it does empty you sometimes. It does burden you as well sometimes. Okay, is this enough, or is this less, or is this what I want to bring out? So there's always that kind of a dilemma attached to it when you want to speak something out there, when you put yourself out there for the world to see. And I think that's with a lot of content creators as well. So talking about the burnouts and the emotional value that you guys are bringing, I am really thrilled and I'm really happy that we could come together on this platform and talk about parenting from a father's perspective. And whatever you guys are doing with your podcast, the things you bring on, it's tremendous. It's wonderful. I will now call this a wrap. But before we leave, is there something that you want to, tell our listeners?
I mean, considering that our listeners 90% would be moms, so I would say that not all fathers, not all husbands are idiots. There are some who are very, very, very clear in the vision of how parenting works, and I think it does start with equality, and that's the message that we definitely want to spread for sure. It's sad that we have to use the term equal parenting, because parenting in itself means, well, equal, right? Because it takes two to make, right? So that's the ideology that we have to work with, that, oh, we believe in equal parenting. No, I mean, parenting is that, like, it's responsibilities that have to be shared. And that's something, that's the message that we want to kind of put across. We want more men just like us to sort of hear our stories, hopefully get inspired and probably kind of just put in that little bit more effort. We still feel we are not there. Like, if you speak to our wives now, next maybe in a new episode, they'll feel that these guys are idiots. They don't do half the things that we do. So like, hey, अभी और बहुत कुछ करना है हमें, even as parents. But yeah, I think we do to the best of our ability. We are constantly there. They always say, right, that as a parent you just need to show up. I don't necessarily subscribe to that. It's not just about showing up. It's showing up and then doing things and then guiding. I think that's the role of a parent, and it's important because it's the entire journey. There are no breaks, right? के हाँ बस 18 साल की बच्ची हो गई, अभी छोड़ दो उसको, जो करना है करने दो, बड़ी छुट्टी हो गई, अब रिलैक्स कर लो. It never works like that. It's never gonna happen. मतलब वो जब तार जुड़ जाते हैं वो जुड़ जाते हैं, हो चुका, वेल्डिंग हो चुका है उसका, वो टूटेगा नहीं कभी. So yeah, I mean, I just feel that effort is very important. Very, very important.
Yeah, I agree. Being emotionally present is very important. And like you said, it's a process of learning and unlearning all that, we thought we knew. And as the children grow, they teach us so much. So you can never be perfect. Perfect parenting does not exist. That's what we talk about here. And we have a term on our podcast, balanced parenting, just as a synonym of equal parenting. Certain things do come into the mom's lap, and certain things can come into the father's lap, and then it can be two to go when it comes to children. So yeah, and it was a wonderful discussion, and I'm smiling right now. So that's a big takeaway from this discussion. Thank you so much, guys, for coming on board and
thanks.
your hearts to us.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Nadir and Peter shared their wisdom with us. Some incredible stories, honest revelations,
some memories. And now I wanted to share with you a beautiful line I read in a book that I also shared on my Instagram channel. Here it goes. Sherman made the terrible discovery that men make about their fathers sooner or later. That the man before him was not an aging father, but a boy much like himself, a boy who grew up and had a child of his own. And, as best as he could, out of a sense of duty and perhaps love, adopted a role called being a father, so that his child would have something mythically important, a protector who would keep a lid on all the chaotic and catastrophic possibilities of life. The Bonfire of the Vanities is the book. And on that line, I take a leave. If you like listening to us, please subscribe, download, and share. Send us a note. Write to us. Send a feedback. We love getting your emails. Till then, keep enjoying and keep listening.